Hello, everybody. Today's guest on our Zoom talks of our page Ballet Through Lines is English award-winning choreographer with 25 years of experience in choreographic field and artistic director Cathy Marston. She was educated in Cambridge and spent 2 years at the Royal Ballet School. Her choreographic works are commissioned all around the world. She was director of BAM Ballet, associate artist of Royal Opera House, among others, and is today director of Ballet Zurich. Let me leave you now to Tatiana, conductor of the talk, and our dear guest, Cathy. And the floor is yours.
Good morning, Cathy.
Good morning.
Nice talking to you. You are now in Zurich since August 23. It's quite some shift to become an artistic director of this big company. We will talk about your past a bit, but mainly about your present appointment and also about your work, which interests us the most, I would say. So now you have this double appointment as an artistic director and as an author, creator, choreographer of your works. How is it going now in Zurich with your new company?
It's very, very busy. So far, well, as you say, I began in August. And while we staged a one-act work of mine in our first program, actually, I didn't create, or I didn't present yet a creation with the company. I've been starting to work on Atonement, which is the big full-length creation that I'll make this year. But we haven't got into its sort of proper rehearsal period yet. So it's been a lot of getting to know the dancers, the team, bringing the team together, welcoming other choreographers and stagers, teachers, and really just forming a way of working together.
So when a person like you gets a new appointment in a company, what is the most important thing you bring from the past, which is important for you, and how do you develop then your work? What's important for you?
Gosh, there are many things that are important to me. I suppose what I'm bringing, both as a choreographer, obviously, but also as a curator and as a leader, is my artistic vision. So even in commissioning other works and curating the program, in choosing the dancers that I invite to come here, it all has to fit within the way that I see dance. It has to resonate right within me. So I can give myself certain strategies and self-impose some rules, let's say, on the way that I want to curate. But ultimately, I bring my gut instinct. So that I would say is the most important thing that I bring is all that I've learned, all that I've experienced in the decades of work that I have, and I bring all of those lessons and that taste, that instinct with me into the company now, and try to remain true to it, because there's very often factors, external factors, that will sort of try to pull you one way or the other, and sometimes that's right, you're listening to those other factors as well, but you have to keep coming back to what is it that I believe in, what is it that I want to bring to the studio and the stage here in Zurich.
So let's go to this point of discussion. What's important for you? What's your gut instinct, as you were saying?
So one of the things that I've talked about, actually in terms of both my programming, but also the way that we work as a company, is, well, I think Stephen Hawkins said it, we stand on the shoulders of those who have gone before us. So I don't want to just throw everything away and just go forwards, in the same way that I want to encourage the different generations within the company to learn from one another. I feel that the past informs the future. And so concretely in my programming, I have self-imposed 3 strands that guide me. One, of course, is that I will bring my own choreography to Ballet Zurich. That was part of the invitation to come here as a director and resident choreographer, and one of the reasons I said yes. You probably are aware I love telling stories in my choreography, so that's a really an important strand of the work we'll be doing. Not only that, though, it's really important to me that the dancers experience the work of other living choreographers. And I use the word living as opposed to contemporary because I feel like often the word contemporary can be understood in different ways. Living choreographers can be working within a very modern world with improvisation. They can be working even within the classical vocabulary. All of those things are interesting to me. But I want the dancers to experience other creative voices and sometimes other repertoire from living choreographers that we'll license as opposed to create here in Zurich. And the third strand is it's important to me to develop the canon of dance. So works that feel key or voices that feel important from the past. And by that, I don't necessarily mean 20th century. We have a luxury here in Zurich that we are funded by the city. We don't have to do Nutcracker every Christmas in the way that many of my American colleagues have to program it in order to meet the budget. So it could include 19th century classics, but it also could include, for example, Les Noces by Nijinsky, which we've just been performing, which is 100 years old this year. Or earlier in the season, we performed Jerome Robbins' Glass Pieces. Bringing these key works and voices into our repertoire alongside the new works, that's also very important to me. So I guess that's one of the ways that my general vision of dance and art really will manifest itself in my work here. I love works of the past, and I love looking at them from different angles. In my own choreography, of course, I do often take inspiration from literature of the past, but often in an unexpected way. And so I hope in general to shed light on the past by looking in other angles at it. And hopefully that will also sort of guide us into a new way of ballet, a new look of ballet.
I'm curious how the invitation came to come to Zurich. Who did that?
Quite honestly, I'm also curious. The story is that it was during COVID, the lockdown still, and I received an email from Andreas Homocki, the intendant here in Zurich, who I didn't know, and he said to me, "We've never met, but I would love to discuss a collaboration with Ballet Zurich with you. Could we have a Zoom?" And I was a little surprised because I know Christian Spuck, so I would have thought he would reach out to me if he wanted me to create a work. Anyway, I made a Zoom appointment with Andreas Homocki, and there and then he offered me the job. It was a little bit of a time pressure because Christian Spuck, as we now know, had been offered the job to direct Berlin Ballet. And I think Zurich had been aware of this, but unable to publicize that fact. And I believe they had made a sort of short list of candidates. He told me they wanted someone who worked with ballet and someone who worked with narrative, both of which obviously applied to me, and that I was the top of their list and would I like the job. So it was a very unusual job offer, I have to say. Yeah.
Well, congratulations. We are looking forward to hear from your work, about your work and your creations as well. I would like to investigate a little bit about this topic about living choreographers. I'm also curious. That's why I've asked you how come this invitation, because there's in the ballet world there's basically no meeting point of performances, productions, and choreographers. So to say, it's a little bit different than it's in theater world, having huge festivals and exchange and things like that. So how do you feel about this difference between two communities, dance and ballet and theater? And I'm talking about this because you come from narrative, and narrative is also important for the theater.
I don't quite understand. What do you mean? How do I feel about the two
Well,
different communities?
yes, for instance, if we want to meet the work of theater, we go to the festivals, and there we meet productions and creators in person, so we can somehow follow and their
Yeah.
achievements and things like that. But in the ballet world, ballet companies are more or less parts of the houses with their repertory, but there's so little exchange
There are.
and knowing.
Well, there's festivals nevertheless. The Migros Steps Festival in Switzerland brings a lot of companies here, just as one example. But I think the dance world is very tightly networked. And in the last decade, I've been lucky enough to travel around the world creating for many wonderful companies. And it's my habit when I go to different places to try and see what's on or meet some people while I'm in town. For example, I remember going to New York and working with American Ballet Theatre on Jane Eyre. But on my day off, I went to the rehearsals of Pam Tanovitz in Brooklyn to see what she was doing, and then recently saw the production that I'd seen her creating at the Barbican in London when I was there working with the Royal Ballet. So I think it's just about a curiosity and reaching out to people. I receive a lot of emails, of course, from other choreographers and agents proposing work and collaboration. And it's quite hard to keep up with everything. It was always frustrating as a independent choreographer. You felt often that you were throwing your work into this black hole. Like you would write emails to all sorts of directors and very often not get a reply. And that would be something I would really say to young choreographers who are trying to find their way into the industry. Don't give up. It's just one of those things. And now I'm in that director's chair and I'm receiving all these emails. I feel terrible because there's only 24 hours in the day and there's so much to do. And so very often, as much as I would like to keep on top of those replies, when you get so many unsolicited emails, it's very difficult to reply personally to everybody. And certainly the opportunities are few. So very often with my programming, especially with these strands that I've just described to you, it's helpful because I can be much more strategic. Okay, I'm looking for a piece, a one-act piece, and it's going to be in this theme. Or, I try, for example, with Les Noces, I wanted to program Nijinsky's Les Noces. I knew it was 100 years old this season, and it's a very specific musical lineup. It's a lot of singers and 4 pianos and percussion. So I had to be very strategic. What will I program next to it? And in the end, it became a program of 3 musical works that were all created in 1923-24. And then I had to decide, well, who could choreograph Ballet Mécanique by George Antheil, which is a fabulous piece, but very challenging. And I was Googling a lot around that and came to Meryl Tankard. Likewise with Rhapsody in Blue, who would bring the spirit that I wanted to find for this ballet, and Matutuzelli November seemed to be the answer. So I think it's just making use of both the internet and my personal network. And then whenever I travel, just making sure I keep my eyes open. If I have a free day, is there anything that I can go and see? Anyone that I can reach out to go and have a look into their rehearsal? It's just curiosity.
Yes, I just wanted to have an insight of how your network works, and actually, it's a good advice for young choreographers and future artistic leaders of the companies how to manage their way. There's another level which is also important and we didn't mention yet, which is the audience. you've said that there's no problem with funding of the company because it was funded by the city, and you don't have to run
There's
for.
no problem. I would never take that for granted. I say
Okay,
right now, we have the luxury that we don't depend on doing Nutcracker every Christmas, which is the reality of most American ballet companies. But I don't take for granted the state funding at all. I mean, that could change at any time. And I think we definitely have to nurture our audience and our relationships within the locality to make sure that that continues.
Yes, we are always aware something happens and then we are cut off funding, but for sure it's different. Also for comparing companies, other companies in Europe with budgeting and so on. But I was addressing the question of audience. How important is this aspect for your work? The audience, what to bring to the audience? Is it just the work, or it's also your personality and later on personality of the company? How important is this for you?
It's extremely important, obviously. I mean, that's the point. Gosh, lots of things in that question. Interestingly, some years ago, I was a fellow on the Claw Cultural Leadership course, which is a fabulous program in the UK. And as part of the course, I had to write a paper, and I chose to write about the advantages of being an artist leader, because I perceive that it becomes less and less fashionable to appoint a choreographer as a director. It's more often now becoming curatorial leaders. And I can understand why, because the job description is becoming ever larger, particularly in companies where fundraising is part of that person's job. It's extremely time consuming. But what I see in my shoes as an artist leader is the possibility to bring my personality and, quite honestly, my heart onto the stage. And that's a very valuable tool, because I think people can be impressed by a leader who's very smooth, who can articulate their program, who can articulate the value of dance and why we should be supporting it and introduce other choreographers. And I mean, when you get someone that does that really well, it's fabulous. But when you see an artist who really brings their heart and soul onto the stage, there's something very different about that. And I think, particularly perhaps in a town or a city the size of Zurich, I want the audience to know me and know what's important to me. And I want to be able to share and exchange about our values. And that doesn't mean to say that I'm going to stand in the foyer and sort of have chats with everybody in every show, because there's too many. It's not that small. But in the interviews that I give, with the work that I put onto the stage, in the collaborations that I initiate within the city, I want the public to understand what's important to me, and as I say, to exchange on it. So, for example, one of my signature works, The Cellist, is based on the story of Jacqueline du Pré, who was a very famous British cellist in the 60s. And her career was tragically cut short because she was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. I made a ballet about her life and music for the Royal Ballet, and we brought it to Ballet Zurich last year, and we'll actually restage it again shortly. When I was in London at the Royal Opera House, I asked them, could we initiate a program for people who live with MS that would run creatively alongside my process with some exchange along the way? And they agreed, and it was extremely successful and continues until now, some years later. And so when I came to Zurich, I asked the Opera House if we could do something similar. And I said, this is really important to me. And I sort of argued the case, why it was important to me. It's a first for Opernhaus Zurich. And I managed to convince the Tonhalle in Zurich, and also the Field, which is an independent group, and the Creative and Artistic Wellness Foundation, Claire Gus West. So it's a team of 4 different partners, and we have started a project called Connect, and it's actually the first which is now bringing together people who live with MS, but also who live with Parkinson's disease. So not the same, but similar, some similarities. And we're running this project every week together. At the moment, it's in a pilot phase, but we've received enormous feedback. I mean, much more than we expected. And so we're really very hopeful that it will continue. So things like that. I would like to think that my job is not only about putting great works on stage, but also putting great work into the community and bringing different sectors of the community who might not normally be able to access or wouldn't traditionally want to access ballet into the theatre. And that takes time, but I'm really encouraged by how we've begun.
Well, our narratives evolve through curiosity and learning, and this is really nice how you explained. But for when we talk about narratives and we talk about living contemporary choreographers, how important, what's the most important thing for the choreographer now, besides being open and trying to find different topics that one relates to and then develops? And particularly, why is it not so important to have ballet performances just on the big scale, that also other kinds of projects in the companies are important?
Well, lots of questions again in one.
I'm sorry.
Why is it important to have projects of a different scale? Well, because you can speak about different things at a different scale. Some things are much more suited to an intimate surrounding, and other things need that sort of very large arena, large length of a program. They will pull in different people. So sort of more intimate performances will maybe reach 200 people in a performance. Obviously, you want to bring in over 1,000, 2,000 people for other events. So I think variety in terms of scale, length of ballets, all of those things I think are interesting to play with as a programmer and also as a choreographer. I know for me, I'm interested at the moment, I guess primarily in the larger scale, in sort of narratives where I give myself a whole evening to tell a story. But sometimes I'm commissioned to do very small works. For example, Joffrey Ballet asked me to create to Wagner's symphonic poem Siegfried's Idyll a year or two ago in collaboration with the Chicago Philharmonic Orchestra. And it was on an unusual stage in the concert hall there with the orchestra behind, just a sort of 19-minute work for 5 dancers. And it was very beautiful for me to find my way into that specific commission. Personally, I work very well within structures. So if I am given or set myself certain parameters or rules, then I find that it unlocks my creativity more than if someone said, do whatever you want, however big it is. that would sort of block me a little bit personally. But of course, that's different for everybody. And I think when you said what's important for choreographers rather than other than curiosity, it's just to find your voice. I mean, most choreographers are ex-dancers or even current dancers. And I think that's often very valuable to have gone through other people's creative processes, to have really embodied different languages as part of your career. But ultimately, what I'm looking for when I'm looking for guest choreographers is a voice that feels really unique and authentic. And that you can only do by really investigating what are the specifics of your journey that will add up to something that's really you. So for me, you know, when I first started in Bern, directing the Bern Ballet, I'd really grown up in the UK as a choreographer. So my work sat very much in the British tradition of Macmillan and Ashton ballets and the Royal Shakespeare Company and BBC period drama and, you know, these sorts of works and English literature primarily. My parents were both teachers of English literature. And when I arrived in Bern and I staged a couple of works that were at least aesthetically within that tradition, they got really criticized. And it was very difficult because I had just, I believe very much in the value of story and the potential of the body to tell story. But quite honestly, I had never really interrogated whether one needs a period costume to tell the story of Ibsen's Ghosts, for example, which was one of these stories. And so I had to dig deep and listen to the critical opinions around me, which were coming from a more German Regietheater tradition. And I had to decide, well, okay, stories are important for me, but actually I do a lot of investigative work with my body that's getting hidden by these large period costumes. What if I didn't have that large period costume and stripped back? And so over my 6 years in Bern, I really managed to amalgamate where I came from, the UK, with where I found myself in the middle of Europe in a German-speaking place. And take from it the bits that felt like I could stand behind them or that I believed in. And that has slowly led to what I would describe as my style, which is kind of unique, and we all have a unique experience. We just have to strip away and be able to define it and probably articulate it as well. I think learning to be able to communicate what we want to do, how we want to do it, to both people that will commission the work, to the audience, but also, very importantly, to the dancers in the room. Communication, along with curiosity, I would feel is a really important quality for a choreographer.
Thank you very much to follow all my questions. It's really nice to see how you go from the last one up until the first one, and I really appreciate your answers and your input to this conversation. Let's focus on your work more. For sure, there's something that means that is like a milestone for your work. One you already described, like you had to adapt to another environment where you started to work in Switzerland, to this German-like theater. We all know what this is, but for sure there's something that convinced you your way of narrative is correct, so that you want to relate to the stories that are already in the literature, or some kind of this kind of narrative. Which production of yours, which creation means the most to you? Like something where you develop the way that you work, not that much of the style, but the way how you work, because I would like to know later on more about your last creation and address some questions to this.
So I think in terms of discovering what I want to do, that isn't one work. That took a period of time. So some years ago, that was, at least 15 years, if not more ago, I was offered a grant to go around America and introduce myself to various ballet company directors. And I did that, and it was a great trip. But I was trying to pitch myself as a very versatile choreographer. I didn't want to be put in a box. I could do abstract work, I could do narrative work, and so unsurprisingly to me now, it didn't really result in anything substantial. And I say that because now as a director, I realized that it would be very difficult to commission someone who could do anything, because you kind of want to know roughly what they're going to do. And then in my time in Bern, actually that quality was advantageous, because I had to sometimes do a full length work, but then sometimes it would also be very helpful if I could just do a little one act piece that would fill that slot. But I realized after 6 years in Bern that the works that had really made my heart sing were the narrative pieces. And so when I left Bern Ballet, I decided, you know what, I don't need to pretend to be everything. I can do the thing I really love. And it just rolled after that. And I don't know what changed in the world that made me get so many commissions at once, but it became my time. And rather soon at that period, I was offered the commission to create Jane Eyre for Northern Ballet in the UK. And it started as actually quite a small scale production, half the company going to smaller stages, a small orchestra. And it was very successful. I think David Nixon, who commissioned it, chose the right story and the right person. We'd worked together before. He knew me very well. And I don't know why I'd never thought of doing Jane Eyre, but it felt very right for me. And so it was successful. Not immediately, but some years later, it was then taken up by American Ballet Theatre, and then Joffrey Ballet, and most recently Hamburg Ballet have staged it. So it's definitely one of those breakthrough works for me. But it wasn't immediate. It does take time. It's not that overnight you're suddenly a huge success. So I think Jane Eyre was important. I also created a work called The Suit for a very small company in the UK called Ballet Black. And because they're very small and they have to tour and the budget was tiny, I needed to figure out how I could tell a story, which was a short story by Can Themba, who's a South African writer, was a South African writer. How could I tell that without any big set? The set had to fit in one case, basically. And I experimented with using the 7 dancers as a kind of Greek chorus. So there were 2 protagonists and everyone else became everything, from the hat stand to the washing bowl to the wardrobe. You know, I literally set the scene with bodies. And that really, I realized, aligns with my ethos. I want to tell stories with the body. And so the more I can strip away the clutter of objects on stage and find creative solutions literally with the dancers, the better. And so that way of working, I then transposed into what became a signature work of mine, The Cellist. It was my first commission for the Royal Ballet Company. And of course, it had been, you know, a goal of mine for 20 years to make a work for that company for the main stage at the Royal Opera House. And it was an hour and a significant work. And I took many of the ideas of this, you know, how can I very swiftly and nimbly change the set using bodies? I took that into The Cellist. And so I think that the sequence of those 3 works was very significant in my development.
I have several questions again, but mainly, so we are at the start somehow. If we imagine you come and you know the stage, the place where you will make your new work. What's the most important thing to do besides knowing the scale of the productions as you described? Sometimes you do the larger scale or full length or the short piece, and of course you have to adjust your production thinking, what will become your work on stage. Who are the people you work with? Do you have your steady buddies, working collaborators, your inspirational friends, or who's those people?
I do have some steady buddies, and I also like bringing new people into the mix. And it can often depend on where the works are as well. There's one particular collaborator that I've worked with for, it must be nearly 25 years now. He's called Edward Kemp, and he's a dramaturg. He himself, he's a writer, librettist, he's been a director. He directed the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts for a long period of time, and now he's the director of the Royal Literary Fund. But we've worked together throughout all of those different phases, and he and I, not in every case, we didn't work on Jane Eyre together, for example, but many of my ballets, we create the scenario together, and that's usually the starting point. I mean, to go back to the beginning of your question, when I'm commissioned and I establish the scale, so let's say it's the Ballet Black with very small scale, or it's Joffrey Ballet, a big, large-scale work for the Lyric Opera House in Chicago, very different things. But what will be right at the beginning is, what is this work? And for me, it's usually, although not always, led by what is the story? Is it a work of literature? Is it a biography? And sometimes it will be a piece of music. So going to different places is quite exciting for me because it allows me to explore new stories. So last June, I created a piece for the Queensland Ballet in Australia, and that had taken several years to come to pass. So, it was some years that we've been talking about it, but it was a piece called My Brilliant Career by Miles Franklin, which is a really Australian story. And I was specifically asked to work in that case with an Australian team, partly for, quite honestly, logistical reasons. But I was able to bring Edward Kemp into the mix. So we developed the scenario. And then I worked with an Australian composer, designer, and light designer and video designer. So it was really, really wonderful because it was a mix of the new and the old. Likewise, when I was first invited to San Francisco Ballet, it was a really exciting chance. I spent my whole summer reading American short stories because I was invited to make a 30-minute work. So that meant it was unlikely to need a full novel. But I went through lots of different short stories and arrived at Ethan Frome by Edith Wharton as the starting point. So, all of these different factors come into play and make my life more exciting, I find. I've forgotten the second part of your question now.
Well, it's okay. I'm happy. It's maybe we would need more time to dig deep into this dramaturgical choreograph work and developing the scenario or libretto or the story for the ballet. Yeah, I have just two questions because our time is slowly running out. Hopefully to talk to you again about this topic sometime in the future. But I would like to know about your future. So do you ever have an idea what you will be doing after your conclusion of one part of your life, which is now, for instance? Do you have any vision of what you'd like to do?
I mean, in terms of the works that I'd like to create, I'm several years in advance because you have to be when you're creating large-scale works, particularly within an opera house context. I'm in the studio with one piece, I'm working with a composer on the next piece, and I'm perhaps working with the dramaturg on the scenario for the following piece. So there's always different plates that I'm spinning. In terms of the larger vision of my future, not really. I mean, I honestly would never have expected to be here at Opernhaus Zurich. That wasn't part of my plan. It's actually a lovely thing because it was my first job. So when I was 18, my very first job was as a dancer here with Ballet Zurich. So it really does feel like a full circle, but not for one moment have I thought, that's where I want to go back to as ballet director. Having said that, when Andreas Homoki called me, it was a subject in my mind because I think in the aftermath of COVID, there were many companies were changing directors, and I had had a couple calls that week even from headhunters. So the question, would you like to direct again, had come up. And so I was already sort of mulling it over in my mind. I loved being freelance, I have to say. I really enjoyed the travel, working with different groups of dancers, going to different places and getting to know different cultural worlds. So it wasn't that I had to direct. Having said that, there is a part of my personality that wants to affect more about our cultural world and our wider world than just making ballets. And so that does make me lean into this particular job. And really being offered the opportunity from the management, the direction, the board here at Opernhaus Zurich to be both of those people. That was what was exciting about this opportunity, to be given the job as director, but also as choreographer, and to be embraced in both of those roles. I think that was what made this the one that I wanted to pursue. what happens next in terms of those bigger jobs, I have no idea. Not at all.
Okay, I wish you all the best for your future, of course. And I like just how you pass different levels of your career. It's really when you what I can see now, and probably also our audience can follow this, is that you fully concentrate on the where you are now. Of course, you are planning, you have plans, but you focus on what you are doing now, and that's really important trait to have. Yeah. I have usually at the end of our talks, I have, before I pass my word to Natasha, if she maybe has a question. It's connected more to our human side, to our souls. Like, I want to know what for you is the most important question or the most important issue of today. Yeah, please.
That's a question I need warning for. I don't think I can answer that on the spur of the moment. There are so many things that are important, peace being one of them. I have two
Okay.
children, the world that we leave for our children, but I can't offer you a perfect word of wisdom like that. There's too many aspects.
I think this is the most important answer you could ever give. That's why I ask. It doesn't matter whether it's a long answer or a thought. Thank you, Cathy. It was a wonderful journey through your work and life. And from my side, from my end, from my house, I wish you all the best for your future and for your work, and especially for your ensemble, for your dancers and people you work with.
Thank you.
Okay, so now to Natasha, and hope to see you soon.
Likewise.
Hello, I'm back. I just want to first think what I want to say is that when I saw your audition for the dancers, I was really impressed that you chose to take the dancers from variety of genders and ethnic background, which I think is very important, especially in a ballet world, to have this openness towards these topics, questions, this what exists nowadays in the world. And I don't think that many artistic leaders are so open. So it's really, really, really nice. That's one thing. And then I wanted to ask you about, but still a bit about dramaturgy. You said you work with a dramaturg developing libretto. But what about afterwards, when you're already choreographing, when you're already doing the piece with the company? Do you still talk to him? Do you still have a connection? Or
Yeah,
you do?
it often depends on the situation. So if the company can afford to bring him, or if he is available, it's wonderful. I mean, if I could have him there all the time, I would welcome that. But sometimes, you get him for a couple of weeks, or a week earlier and a week later. He's always on the end of the phone. So sometimes I can call and say, this bit, it doesn't really work. And he's very good at unraveling knots in my head. He's also really good with working with the dancers. So when he would come, let's say 2 or 3 weeks before a premiere, and I'm in, crazed mode of trying to finish the choreography and bring in the light and all of the other elements, he will quietly work with some of the dancers in the corner in a small studio and bring more details, give more feedback, and just generally feed into their work that makes the work richer in the end. So yes, we do definitely try to stay both involved as much as possible.
Yeah, because I think it's very important, especially with narratives, what you do. But anyhow, in a dance world, I think it's important to have someone somewhere, you know, to talk to have an
It's hard to find
outside eye or something, you know.
It's,
Yeah.
I think, getting the balance of finding someone that you trust. I was recently involved in, actually with him, we wrote a screenplay for a large film organization. And there were many producers involved, and it was commissioned, but you know, we had feedback every time from, you know, 6 to 10 people. And it's quite that's quite shocking as an artist coming from the theatre, where you maybe have 2 or 3 voices giving feedback. And I think the skill of giving feedback is really complex, because an artist can very easily shut down. And I'm experiencing this self. It's also for me as a director. How can I best support the choreographers that I bring here? And it's a learning process. But I think when you find the person that matches, so it's a critical friend who you trust, and you both have, I mean, Ed really understands how I'm arriving at decisions because he's been on the journey with me. So he's able to be an outside eye, but he's also able to be an informed collaborator. It's a different thing. And sometimes it's the right chemistry and sometimes it's not. I think those things all count. It can be challenging if you go sometimes as a guest choreographer to a theatre and there's a dramaturg there, and they can be really wonderful. But if you don't know them and they don't know you, it takes a time to get to know one another, and that's an entirely different process. So I'm very positive about working with dramaturgs and with assistants and with collaborators, but I think it's a skill that you have to practice, and sometimes it works better than others, and that's just life.
Yeah. And there is one question I think well, an issue I want to address. It's about we had a talk with Helen Pickett, and we talked about that a little bit. How is it to be an artistic leadership in that position, and also a choreographer, and also being a woman?
Oh God, that's a whole other interview. That's not a short answer. I'm sure.
I know it's not a short answer, but
yeah,
I think it's an important topic in ballet world still. So how was it? Did you have any problems, or did you feel that it's different because you're a woman or not?
Well, because I've never been a man, it's very hard to know if it would have been different. I feel in general, I try to define myself as Cathy. I'm aware that historically, there have been less female people in leadership positions, or also in given large choreographic opportunities. And I'm sure Helen has given many wonderful observations about that. I think it is slowly changing, and many of the large companies now have female leaders. But we're all extremely different. We have different approaches. And so to generalize, I generally resist the generalization. There are, of course, particulars about my experience of being a woman. You know, I'm a mother that does, you know, has it added and confused, and, you know, part of my life was taken up with having children. Part of it still is taken up with having children. But a male director can also be a parent and may have similar experiences. So I really try to avoid generalization, because I feel with many of my brilliant female colleagues, I admire them, but we are different. I think to go into my personal experience of being a woman in dance, that was a much longer conversation.
Okay. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
So we have to say goodbye now. Thank you very much, Cathy, for being our guest.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting.
Good luck with your leadership and with your choreographies and everything. And maybe we will meet again.
I hope so.
Okay, bye-bye. Ciao.
Ciao.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.